So this morning we're looking at Philippians Chapter 2, and Paul continues in this letter and starts to move into the theme of humility. And he is saying, if there is any encouragement in Christ, any comfort, any participation in the Spirit, any affection and sympathy, complete my joy. What is going to make him happy? They've talked about in chapter 1 their love and care and partnership with him. And so how can the Philippian church, complete his joy? Well, it's by doing this. Being of the same mind, the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. He's saying, guys, you need to be in unity. You need to be together. This is what really is important, having the same heart. And he then uses this lovely phrase, which is a real verse that we should learn and memorise. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Wow, what an amazing thought that is, to do nothing from selfish ambition. Right? And this is humility, to count others as more significant. And what that's saying is when we think about the battles that we're facing at the moment, where we're battling this virus as a community, as a society, it's so easy, isn't it, to hoard and to take things for ourselves, to try and keep ourselves out of harm's way. But that's not how Paul is encouraging the church to behave. We're not behaving selfishly, but we count others as more significant because we are living in humility, and we're not looking to our own interests, we're looking to the interest of others. And why? This is the mind of Jesus Christ. This is how Jesus thought and behaved. And Paul goes on in this section here to talk about the perfect example of humility. Jesus Christ is the perfect example of how to live a humble life, because he was God in heaven. He was equal with God. And what did he choose to do? He chose to leave heaven and come to earth. That in itself was a massive step down for God, but he went further than that. He emptied himself. He became a servant here, and he was found in human form. And what do we know about his birth? We know that his birth was in a stable, in a manger. What a humbling experience that must be for God. And he becomes obedient to the point of death. Jesus is the only one who didn't have to die. He didn't need to die, but he chose to die. And he didn't just choose to die, he chose to die on a cross. What a humiliation, to die on the cross. This is a perfect example of humiliation and humility. But what does humiliation in this lead to? It leads to exaltation. It leads to God glorifying Jesus again and saying, you are worthy of all honour and all praise, not because of your great power or your great majesty or your great might, but because of what? Because of your humility. And this is the example that Paul is encouraging the church to follow. Be like Jesus. Live out a humble life. Don't do things from selfish ambition, but consider others as more important than yourself. Paul goes on to ask them to obey in this matter. He says, because God is working in us, or working in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. God is at work for his pleasure, not our pleasure. We often want God to work in our lives for our pleasure, but really it's for God's pleasure. That's what it's really all about. And so he says to go on and do all things. Here's a challenge: do all things without grumbling or disputing or complaining. Why? So we're no moaning, basically. We're not to be moaners. We are to be blameless. That you be blameless and innocent, children of God. Why? So no moaning leads to a holier life. And what is the point of a holy life? That you might shine as lights of the world into a crooked and twisted generation. Right? We are called to shine brightly. And I'm just going to highlight the word shine because it's nice and yellow. And this is where we're at today. The question is what are you moaning about? Are you a moaner? Are you someone that whinges and complains? Are we moaning about the isolation that we're facing? Are we moaning about COVID-19 and all the pressures? Or are we shining as lights to the world? Because when they look at us, they think, you guys are just different. And that's Paul's challenge, is this humility leads to no moaning, which leads to a holy life, which leads us to shining in the world. And so Paul finishes this chapter by giving them some real life examples. He's used Jesus as an example of humility, but now he's using Timothy, and he's basically saying, guys, if you want to see humility, look at these guys. Look at Timothy. Look at Epaphroditus. Look at them. They are the guys that radiate this idea of humility. Why? Because they seek they are genuinely concerned. Timothy is genuinely concerned with the Philippians' welfare, and he is described as a servant. He has served with me in the gospel, and the same for Epaphroditus. He is a brother, a worker, a soldier, a messenger, and a minister. He is all of these things because even though he nearly died for the work of Christ, right, he risked his life to complete what was lacking in your service to me. These are the guys that are so humble, they're willing to die to serve others. And so this is our question for us this morning as we're reading this passage. Where do we need to ask for more humility? Who do we need to consider as being more important than ourselves? And really, how can we, in this time, how can we serve others? That's a great question for us to consider.